there is no emphasis on those on standardized testing in the training system that I came through. But we do understand the importance of assessing. And even in the Montessori classroom, the teacher is, is assessing what's going on. Even if there isn't this pressure of, okay, you have to attain this grade or you have to have these skills mastered, the teacher's always making this assessment because they want to make sure as they're guiding the student that they're able to make sure that they're coming away with the full range of skills they're supposed to have at that particular age, that particular time in life. So as parents, as we're working with our children, we want to be able to, assess their work, but also teach them how to do a self-assessment. And that way they can take that ownership for their learning, and it kind of demystifies that whole idea of, testing and how well am I doing, because students get a sense of themselves of, okay, how am I doing? What do I need to do to really understand this particular area in math or anything in life in general? The same principle applies. But in terms of math, assessments can be very important, and it's really just to kind of guide the learning of the student, inshallah. And then as we're doing these assessments, we're also making goals, because the whole point of assessing where you are is to see where you want to go, right? And how to get there. So we're going to talk a bit about how to set goals, and not just any old goals, but goals that are achievable, inshallah. And then we're going to talk about a few qualities that we want to instill in our children. And these are qualities that we're, inshallah, instilling in ourselves. We're working on it, having these in ourselves, but then we want to be able to model them, but also teach our children these skills because they will help them with their math journey. But just in the journey of life, these were all applicable too. And this will help build the capacity to love and enjoy math, because some children have a fear, or they just feel like, okay, I'm not a math person, I can't do this. But if we create this kind of environment and we give them this exposure that engenders love, they're able to approach math without fear, and it's more like curiosity. Oh, I don't know how to do this. What is going to make this work? As opposed to, oh, I just can't do it, which is sometimes what we do when we kind of get really shut down and self, really opening ourselves up to really enjoy maths. And then I want to talk a little bit about the essential building blocks, and then how we can use these math skills at home, inshallah. And then when you're using them at home, we're reinforcing it. So they're understanding how math works practically, but also how it works theoretically, inshallah. Can you go to the next slide? So there are some foundational math skills that we're going to be, covering when we think about the primary stage of learning. And the first one we talk about, we think about, is numerical operations. So children really know, okay, when am I adding, when am I subtracting, when am I multiplying, when am I dividing, how do I use these? How do I use it when it's just a normal number sentence? And how do I use it when it's a word problem? Sometimes you have, word problems that are just one step, i.e. there's just one operation going on. But sometimes you have a number of steps or a number of different operations. And teaching children like how these operations work is a key to really understanding, a lot about foundational math that applies to other areas of math, inshallah. And then we're also going to be going into, fractions, understanding what it means when you have a number that is not a whole, it's part of a number. And then you have your decimals, like how do we relate to decimals? And the thing about teaching these things is, and this is really pulling from the Montessori approach to education, is we start in a very concrete way. So children can see, okay, what does a fraction look like? You might have, for example, you might bring in some squares and you're cutting them up into four, you're showing quarters. Or you might have a circle, you're cutting it up into a half, into two to show a half, or into four to show quarters, or into 8 pieces to show 8. So whatever it is, they can physically see it, they can touch it. And that way, when they actually start doing the word problems, a lot of these things begin to make sense. And this is one thing I would really advise, parents, when they are teaching these things, is to find really solid ways to show concretely what this means, i.e. what do fractions actually mean? What do decimals mean? What do percentages actually look like? So that when they start to do this on paper, it begins to make sense. It makes it easier for them to understand and apply these things abstractly, inshallah. And then we're going into algebraic concepts, like really understanding, okay, the relationship between numbers. So there's something that we don't actually know. How can we derive what that value is from the what is known? And I think many of us are familiar with the fact that, this particular understanding of math came into Europe through the books written by Muslim mathematicians like our Al-Khwarizmi. That's a bit of a tongue twister there. Al-Khwarizmi is, was a Muslim mathematician. And the thing about a lot of our Muslim scientists and thought leaders is that they weren't just experts in one field, right? They might be known for their math, but they also, a lot of them were, well versed in Quran, in fiqh, in in other sciences as well. But he's known for, he's remembered for his math. And what, the link that some historians have made is that it comes from understanding things like the inheritance laws. So you think about it, we know that, we might have, different people getting different shares. And the way you're calculating is that you know that there's a ratio between the kind of the shares that are given. And this is kind of how these science of, algebraic, equations and number sentences come up, because you're seeing, okay, if this person is in having this amount and this is what's being shared, but we don't know exactly what the share is going to be, depending on the relationship between the person who has, has passed away, who's leaving, the amount that's been left behind. And it's interesting because maybe when they're very little, you don't necessarily have to go into details, but it's nice, especially when they're a little bit older, is to tell them a bit about where did these sciences come from. So that there's not this like fear of it. It's like, oh, you know what? This is something that was used very practically for sharing our inheritance. And it's something that then traveled into different parts of the world, getting into Europe and becoming part of the basis of mathematics as we understand it today, in the West. And then also data analysis. We're hearing data all the time. We're seeing it around us, and being able to look at these numbers and understand what it means at least introductory level, things that we're going to be covering, at this age, during this age. And then understanding like shapes, how shapes work, understanding, some foundational geometry and spatial reasoning. And that way, as you're seeing different kinds of triangle, for example, you understand, okay, what are the angles here? Or you're looking at different figures, you're understanding what are the relationship between these shapes, inshallah. Can go to the next slide. Now, so one of the questions that we might ask is, why are fundamental math skills important? Obviously, they're important because every time you're doing math, you're building on the skills you had before. And if you don't have a foundation, it's very hard to build. But also, not only does it affect the math ability of a child, but also their reading comprehension. There was a study, and it's mentioned here in detail, about how they noticed that children who had that solid math foundation, they improved not just their math skill, their math comprehension, but also their reading comprehension. Because when you're doing math, you're really taught how to think in a very logical way. And if you know this can apply to reading and understanding what is being read. And as we know, this is a gateway to academic success. The idea of critical thinking, being able to problem solve. These are all things that, that you're giving your child access to when they have a very strong foundation in how maths works. Can you go to the next slide? And now we'll talk a little bit about assessments. Now, like I mentioned before, the assessments aren't just to grade the child. It's really to kind of gauge, how a child is doing. Are there any gaps in learning? And it's so important in maths to kind of identify those gaps, because it might be a very simple concept that a child doesn't understand, but because they're missing that concept, it makes it harder to do other types of maths. And then when a child is doing their work, they're not achieving success. And they're beginning to think, okay, I'm not a math person, or I can't do this. But not recognizing it isn't really about their cognitive ability. It's just about there's a building block that's missing. And when that building block is in place, then that material actually becomes a lot easier. And when things become easy, it becomes enjoyable, right? So this is why it's really important to kind of identify those gaps, so that when a child is given the tools to master that particular skill that they didn't really understand, so that math can become more enjoyable for them, inshallah. And there are a number of places that you can get assessments from. I know Steward One, they do have an assessment, and which I saw, Hind will make accessible to people who have registered. But also you have White Rose, where they have a number of different assessments for different age groups that you can purchase. Whereas the Steward Ones, I believe theirs is complimentary for those people who are, looking for specifically the material that they need to prepare their child for whatever grade they're going into, or year that they're going into. And it's important as well as you're assessing your child is also reflecting on your child's experiences with math. Because sometimes a child might be actually really good at math or maths, but because they might not feel confident about it, or they might have had experiences where they felt like this is something that they don't really enjoy, they might not put as much effort into it. So when we're doing the assessment, it isn't just, okay, what are they scoring, but what do they believe about themselves when it comes to maths as well? That has to be taken into consideration as you're designing a plan for your child. Because if your child doesn't believe that they're capable, the kind of plan you're going to come up with is different from a child who's very confident in math. So you might have two children who have the same skill level, but because of they have different levels of confidence, you're going to approach it differently for each for the child, depending on their previous experiences, learning math and their confidence in the subject. You can go to the next slide, inshallah. So when we talk about goals, it's all ties up. Understanding their previous experiences, doing the actual assessment, using assessments that have been established to help you see, okay, what are the actual math skills a child should know at a certain age. When you've done this and you're beginning to say, okay, you know what, let's chart a plan for my math plan for my child, there's two things I want us to consider here. One is, as a parent, we are charting this particular journey because we have a vision, right, of what we want for our children, and we have kind of understand, okay, what is the path to get there. But for our children, they might not fully get that, but it's important to start to give them those tools so that they can begin to make their own goals. For example, you might say, you're memorizing your 2 times tables or 3 times tables, and your child can say them, with some confidence, maybe not as quick as they could do, but you might have a little timer, like a sand timer. It's amazing how kids love those egg timers that we have the sand in. And you might have like I'm thinking about when I had a classroom, I had a 1 minute one, a 2 minute one, a 3 minute one, and they were color coded. So children knew, okay, if I wanted to see if I could do something in a minute, I'll get the 1 minute timer, I'll put it on and see if I can say my timetables. If it's, if I think, okay, you know what, maybe I'm not as quick with my 3 times tables, I'm going to use my 2 minute timer, but I'm going to make that goal that next time I try it, I'm going to try it with the minute timers. The idea here is that the teacher has their overall goal, that being the parent, if it's a parent who's homeschooling, and then the children are being motivated to set their own mini goals. And they might even have some longer term goals depending on the age of the child. Because like for a 10-year-old, it's not difficult for them to say, you know what, in a month's time, I would like to be able to do X, Y, Z. Or they might say, or next week, I'm gonna see how many word problems I can do, in this time period, or how many, multi-digit so, or long division problems or whatever, whatever that thing is that you're working on, they can set their own goals. Because you notice that when children have a role in setting goals, they're also quite excited about what they can do, what they can achieve. So here, when we talk about goals, we want to make those goals attainable. And there's this acronym that, that's been established, which is the word SMART. So S standing for specific. You have a specific thing that you're working on. It isn't just, okay, I want to be better at math. There's very something specific. For example, you want to master multiplication tables. That might be the particular goal for that week. And now you want to have you want it to be measurable. So you're not going to say, okay, just the timetable, but in what time period do I want to be able to do that? Or how can I measure that? So I might say, you know what, by Monday, I want to be able to say my 3 times tables, without making more than one mistake. I wanted my child to be able to do that, for example, as a parent, you might decide that. Or you might say, I want them to be able to really master doing 3-digit addition or doing subtraction and then being able to check their answers. So you're deciding, and this is why, when you're mapping, you've done your assessment, you're taking a bit at a time. You might have done an assessment on, operations, for example, and you realize that, oh, my child is really struggling with subtraction. Let me go over it again with them. And then I want to teach them how to check it. So now the goal might be, okay, they can do 2 problems and check those problems within this particular time period, or by, with you're maybe you're making your goals on Sunday, you're saying by Wednesday, by midweek, this is the goal I have. And then you might share it with your child. You might just have it internally, and then you're working with them, and you'll say, oh, you know what, Masha, they've got that. You're checking that off, and then you're setting another goal. And like I said, it's also a good idea to have them set some goals. And one thing you might want to have for this is perhaps have a journal, where they have, their math goals, or it might be at the end of the notebook. They've got a math notebook they're using. At the back of it is where they're putting down their goals, and they might have the date there. And it could just be very simple sentences of things that they want. So we talked about it being specific, being measurable, and then attainable. You want for yourself and for your children, as you're teaching them to set goals, that these goals be attainable. Because if they are too challenging, they're not going to achieve the goal. They're not going to meet the goal. And when one doesn't meet one's goals, it can be demoralizing, right? So you want to make those goals really attainable. There should be some challenge to it, but it shouldn't be something that is really without outside the reach. For example, you might say, you know what, I just want my child to memorize the 7 times tables, in a couple of days. And for some children, they definitely can do that. But you have to recognize, okay, how long did it take for them to do some of the other work? Do they understand like fully like the relationship between numbers? Do they understand is skip counting something that they're used to? Have they been building their memorization capability, So you have to take these things into account as you're creating these goals or you're forming these goals. And also the goals need to be relevant. When the goals are relevant, when they have meanings, it motivates the child. So if they're understanding, like the easier it is for them to know their timetables, for example, it helps with other kinds of math. It helps them with multiplication, because when they've got these tools, it's like you're gathering up a toolbox. You got all your tools, you can get the job done. These are kind of analogies you can give your child, like, okay, these are the tools we need to do this kind of problem. And when you have all these in place, doing this, even though it looks hard right now, it becomes really easy. And you might even give an example, like where you have a multiplication problem and you are showing them like how to do it, and you're, oral, you're using mental math to do it. And they might be like, wow, you did it just like that. And you tell them, okay, it's because I've memorized this. And then you tell them, like, you can memorize this too. When you memorize it, it'll become easy for you too. And it might not all happen today, but we're going to work on this step by step till we get to where we need to be. And that's why, it has, it's relevant, because when things are relevant, like I said, it motivates the child. When the child is motivated, learning is easier and there's less resistance, to the parent or to the material. And the last one is that there needs to be a timeline. There needs to be some kind of time attached to it, because that's what makes it, makes your goal, it's easier to see your goal when there's a time. Which if you just say, okay, I want my child to know my 9 times table, when's that going to happen? This month, next month, next year, it's too loose. Whereas when you have these very attainable, like what we refer to the SMART goals, it's easier for you to see their progress and also for them to see it as well, and for that to motivate their learning. You can go to the next slide, Charlotte. Now, I wanted to talk about these concepts because we want for our children to develop their own ability to, to think about their work, to care about their work, to kind of go back to their work, to want to just, to be able to have these habits of assessing themselves, like a self-assessment. So I thought about these three concepts. One of them is muraqabah, muhasabah, and sabr. And the thing is that within the Islamic studies and the way we see things with the faith, they have specific definitions. So some of them I'm using them kind of loosely to apply to skills that I want for them. I think our children need to develop for math. So you think about muraqabah is usually the idea of kind of like, bringing yourself to account, thinking about, how you've spent your day, for example, or how you spent your time. It's like really like this kind of reflecting, having this like reflective reflection on one's actions. So when we think about reflecting when it comes to your math, it's like you've done your problem. You're not just, okay, I wrote the answer, but you're thinking, does that make sense? If you think about it, the skill of estimation is part of that. Because if you know how to estimate and you've done an addition problem, for example, 278 plus 410. If you can estimate, okay, 278 is about 300, 410 is about 400. You add the 3 and 4 together is 700. So you're using these skills to kind of have an idea of what should it look like. So if your answer ends up being 6,800 and something, maybe because a child put an extra zero in there or missed out the place value or whatever it is, they can see, okay, I made a mistake. And they can kind of go back and say, okay, let me go back to the steps I went through to kind of figure it out. So if you teach them that skill of checking, thinking about what you've done, that does this make sense? How did you go through your steps? And just training them to kind of like go through a process of, self-awareness when we're engaged in actions, or even after an action, to kind of go back and look at it, is something that can apply to life in general, but will really help with the math process. When we talk about muhasaba, it's kind of similar in like, it's almost like bringing oneself to account. Like you're thinking, okay, how did I do today? What what kind of what am I working on? How is it going? So this idea here is like a child begins to take responsibility themselves, like, okay, I did this particular work today, and this is how it went. This is what I need to work on. These are things that are more difficult for me. These are things that are easier for me. It's like really teaching our children to kind of have that skill. And these are things that, like I said, can apply to anything, but will really help with math. And then supper is so important because one of the definitions that I think of when I think of supper is this idea of, persevering in something that is of benefit, even when things are difficult. That's really what supper is. It's not just, okay, I'm patient, but it's like still doing what needs to be done in the face of difficulties. And that's math, if you think about it. The fact that you're going through a question, you might get it wrong. You got to go back again and look and see, okay, what went wrong? Or I might have to ask a question to figure out what's going on. It really helps to build that ability to have sabr, to be able to keep working, because it's easy to kind of give up, to say, you know what, this is too much, I can't do it. But sabr here is not giving up. It's still working through things, even when it's hard, because you're committed to trying your best to get this done. And it's just showing our children that this is one of the ways we have ihsan in what we do, right? In having excellence in what we do, is really trying to apply ourselves when we're doing our work, inshallah. Can go to the next slide. And then these are just some ways of building capacity to love and enjoy math. Is one of them is just having a safe learning space. So children know that mistakes are okay. Obviously, we're not saying, we're not encouraging mistakes, right? But when they do make mistakes, just say, no, you know what, we're human beings, we make mistakes, we just try to fix them. And we just, we work on our skills, we do, so we let them realize that mistakes aren't the problem. The challenge is, oh, am I working too fast? Am I going back to check my work? Am I thinking about the process in which I did the work? They're teaching those skills so that they can actually self-correct. And the way they're going to learn this is that they know that it's okay to try things. And even if I make a mistake, I can go back, I can figure out what went wrong, or ask for some assistance, and I can self-correct, right? And then having that growth mindset. And it's so important. It's so important to everything, because sometimes our children might feel, okay, if I'm getting things wrong, it means I don't know how to do this, or I can't do this. So I'm going to focus on the subjects that I do really well in, because they're achieving success there. And the ones they're not doing well in, they just like, okay, I don't want to do it. Whereas a growth mindset says, whatever you work on, you can get good at. And it's not like your learning has ended. It's just telling you that we continually learning things, and we continue to have opportunities to get better at what we do and what we try. And then we have an environment that nurtures creativity. Creativity is connected to math, and creativity happens in so many ways. And there are some studies, I don't actually have any in front of me, but this could be, you can research this yourself, where it talks about the kind of math scores you find in schools that have strong music programs or strong art programs, because creativity helps with that. And in fact, if you think about, traditionally, music was classified as part of mathematics, because of the order that you find in this particular science. And this would apply to Quran memorization, apply to learning to play the duff, applies to geometric patterns, like all the different ways of creativity that Muslims have developed. All of these things also help nurture the skills that one needs in mathematics. And also, it's a fun way of really helping children enjoy math and love it. And then applying it, teaching our children, how to save, how to give, if they have a business idea, how to, put money into that and plan for that, and earn money through business, through entrepreneurship, but also investing in others' ideas, because you might have a sibling who says, you know what, I actually want to start a business making I don't know, paper planes, or selling lemonade or muffins or whatever it is. And one of the children like realized, oh, I've got some money saved. And then encouraging them to do things like invest. Okay, you can put this particular amount into your siblings' business or your friend's business or your cousins, and then you're actually talking about ethics of business now. What kind of contract we're going to have? What kind of, how what kind of relationship is there? And then that's a little bit of a segue into understand a bit about Islamic businesses. How does that work when you put money in? What then happens? So because it's different from a regular, business, the way, because there's this shared idea of shared risk, when it comes to Islamic businesses. So these are ways, especially for older children, that you can bring in different aspects of the faith and get them interested and thinking about these things, so that when they're older, they're not just taking in whatever the wider society tells them how businesses should run, but they have a solid foundation of how we see businesses as Muslims, and talking about money as well and how it flows in society. And this is connected here because sometimes we'll feel that they have to kind of hoard money, and money is a sign of their righteousness or their favor, how they've been favored by God, not recognizing that wealth is is a test, and not necessarily a bad thing. But it's something that, how are you going to use it? Is it going to be used for benefit in society, or is it going to be hoarded? Is it going to be used to control or exploit or oppress, or is it going to be used to bring about goodness and to build infrastructure? So just even at a young age, just talking about these things, make our children realize that there's a bit more to the world than the narrative of dominant society. In dominant society, a lot of it's about, okay, go make money, spend it, or make money and hoard it. But for us, it's like it flows. If you think about the role of zakat in society, role of sadaqah in society, it's supposed to flow. It isn't supposed to just be hoarded somewhere. And then the mental math method, that ability to do mental math is such a gift for our children. They know their math facts. They know how to make zero. They know how to, the multiplication facts. These are all things that help them in all aspects of mathematics. And these are things that children can easily learn through song, through play, through games, through repetition. And children, especially younger children, already love repetition. So these are ways to really build up their ability to excel in mathematics in a way that's really enjoyable. And as you know, the more you enjoy things, the more you want to do it. So we make math enjoyable for our children, the more they want to do it, the more they want to explore, the more they want to really develop, this capability, inshallah. And then you should also encouraging our children to create their own math problems. If you're doing math together, challenge them. Okay, what kind of math problem could you put together? And then they solve it, or you solve it, and math games, or even little books about math, the math concepts they've learned, but they, put this together and they can share with a sibling or a friend, or even, sell it if they want to, if they go through the whole process of, writing it, publishing it. And this could be just done by hand, doesn't necessarily had to be done, on a very large scale, but it can also be, published with organized, companies like Amazon or other, perhaps more ethical companies that are out there. And, creating math tools too. Like, when I say math tools, I'm talking about things that can be used for learning math. I think about place value, there are ways that you can, create material that help children understand, okay, how do the ones work? How do tens work? How do hundreds work? How do thousands work? And I think that process of them creating some of these tools can help them understand like number sense. And so when they're doing math problems, it's real to them. It's not just about, okay, these are just some numbers written down, but this is actually what the quantity could look like, or what the value of the number is. And the last one here is making models to teach abstract concepts. So when you're teaching fractions, for example, you have, shapes. You might have, like I said, like a big cutout of a circle. And they're holding and they can feel, okay, this is one. You cut it into two, and then you're like, okay, you feel these are actually two halves. And you're kind of breaking things down so they can actually feel what these concepts actually look like in the real world. So when they're on paper and they're doing a problem, it makes more sense because they understand how these numbers work. We can go to the next slide, inshallah. Okay. So, and we this is almost like a summary of those building blocks, the idea of sabr. Practice is so important, because as we all know, math is something that you become really good at, and it becomes easy when you practice. Healthy mindset, and that part of that is having a growth mindset, and just feeling safe with the subject. These are all the ways that we can feel they got your children to have the confidence to try and to make mistakes and to get up and keep trying and making connections. So the math is not just, okay, what's written in the textbook, but what we're doing within the home, whether it's, saving, spending, giving, you know, cooking, baking. These are all ways that just, or even DIY work. These are all ways that we're bringing math to life around us. And then strong mental math. This is a tool that when we give our children this particular gift of strong mental math, it makes mathematics, subhanAllah, it's enjoyable for them. And then a firm understanding of place value. This is something that, especially for young children, even sometimes for children who are slightly older, there's like place value is a very abstract concept. They don't actually understand what it really means. And that's why it's easy to make mistakes when, doing, problems with numbers because they're not really understanding what's going on. So spending that time to give a really solid foundation in place value, this helps in foundational math, which then helps with any kind of math one goes to, inshallah. And I think that we have the last one, which is, or we talked about this kind of, I mentioned it already. You can go to the next page, which is, applying math skills at home. If you're going somewhere thinking, okay, how far is this trip? How long is it going to take? How many miles are we traveling? Or, mapping some of these things out and doing some of the calculations. We need to stop at this particular place first, well, if we drive a certain number of miles and then we're going somewhere, we need to do another one. What altogether, what is our trip gonna, how long is our, no, how far is the trip gonna be? Like teaching children, like how to apply, word problems of, adding distances or estimating distances or, subtracting or any of these skills can be applied to that, can be applied to cooking and baking, like I mentioned before. When you're, doing baking, you're scaling your recipe up. They can practice doing that. They can scale it down as well. They're learning how to work with fractions, how to, understand abbreviations, understand the differences between an ounce, measurement and a teaspoon or, a tablespoon. And I'm thinking in American numbers right now, because I know we have like measuring cups that we use when we measure. I know in England it's a bit different. You have, it's a different system, but the point of it is you're showing them like, okay, this is what quantity means. So when you see it in a word problem, it makes sense. And these could be applied same thing to, DIY projects, what you're doing at home. If you decide, okay, we're going to paint this particular wall and, how much, what does that mean? What kind of, no, what area are we working with? Or if we're gonna do some certain thing in the garden, we're gonna maybe put perhaps grow, plants and flowers. Okay, about how much soil we're gonna need. Then that way they can see, okay, how does perimeter work in real life? How does area work in real life? And then we mentioned before the idea of budgeting and personal financing. So they're understanding how money works, but also, the how to work with money and how to, the idea of estimating what amount is going to go towards this particular thing. Or if you're budgeting for a particular item you want to buy, okay, if we're going to do this over, a month, how much do we have to put away each week for us to have the amount we need? So these are all like ways that we can get our children to think about, numbers, and it reinforces what we're teaching, during our homeschool classes. I think, is there another slide? I think, yeah. So I think
This is my slide. Jazakallah khair. So I want to before I open it up to questions, I just first of all, Jazakallah khair, Ustadha Rakaya, and I wanted to let everyone know that Ustadha Rakaya will, inshallah, bismillah, be teaching on our Stewards platform a maths primary class using some of the methods that she spoke about today, inshallah. And if you're interested in that, you can go to our website and be able to look for more. And then I want to, sorry about that. I want to then open it up to questions really, so that you guys can ask anything to Ustadha Rakaya when she's here, inshallah. So if you want to type a question in the chat, you can, or if you want to open your mic, you can also do that, inshallah. And it's okay if no one has any questions, also just let us know. Because then inshallah what we'll do is wrap up then inshallah.
So, you know what? There is a really nice book. I think it's called Basic Montessori. I don't, I think I have it in front of me right now, which is, it's really good because you don't have to have a whole bunch of materials to use it. You can just apply Montessori math to working with children. Um, so that's one book I would recommend. But also I would recommend, there's lots of like videos online, there's lots of, blogs, is going and seeing, okay, how is this taught? And then you can decide, okay, how do I want to do this with my child? Especially, excuse me, sorry, especially if you don't necessarily have a Montessori background, but you can understand, okay, how, what, or you might not, be in a position to, buy, a bunch of different materials because Montessori, math, a lot of it is materials. But these are things that you can substitute. You can find, other, like for example, with place value, there's a whole, set of materials that we use for place value. But what I did with my son when we were doing it, I got popsicle sticks and we just took 10 together, we put them in a rubber band. This is our 10, We put 10 tens together, we put them together in a rubber band. This is our 100, right? And our 1,000, we couldn't tie in a rubber band, but we found something to tie it in. So that way we had, okay, this is what our ones look like, this is what our tens look like, this is what our hundreds, our thousands. And he was able to create them. And this helped actually with his counting. And he actually really enjoyed, the whole idea of, putting it together and then doing it. And then when we started doing math problems, we used that, which was a very inexpensive way of doing it as opposed to, buying lots of different materials. So I'd recommend that book, Basic Montessori. And it's I don't remember the title now, not the title, the author, but I can send the information to him so she can have that for you, inshallah. But that's one book that I can think of that's really very nice. I know there are other things out there, but that's the one that I'm familiar with that I've used a little bit with my children. But also I'm trained, I do have a diploma in Montessori education too. So but that's what I would recommend, inshallah. But the main thing about Montessori math is that they're teaching it in blocks and they're going from the concrete to the abstract. So you always start with something very physical that the children can see and feel, and then you're showing them how to apply that to this is what it looks like on paper. That generally is the theory behind it. So you can use that to apply for to whatever you're teaching your child, inshallah. If you can wait for a second, I can just go grab the book because I do have it with me. Let me just, if I give me a moment, I can get it, inshallah.
So when Estella Rakaya is just gone to get the book, I wanted to, if anyone has any more questions, if you could put them in the chat so when she comes back, she can answer them, inshallah. Would be appreciated.
So I'm gonna type the name and the author in the chat because my 4-year-old is very quiet in the other room playing, and if I go out to go get this book, she might decide she wants to make an appearance. So I'm going to just type it in the chat. So that is, but this one is actually for children under 5. How old are um your children or the child you want this for? Oh, 9. Oh, okay. Um, let me get back to you on that then, because it's a bit different then, because yeah, I'm sorry, for some reason, I don't know why I just assumed, the child was younger. So I can give you some tips on it. It's just I can't think of any books, to be honest, because really with the elementary, there are not a lot of books out there that just give you elementary math. The expectation is that you're in a fully immersive Montessori classroom. And so because of that, I'm not familiar with books that adapt it, but I think, I don't mind if you want to email me or contact me. I could probably give you maybe a couple of tips on some things that you could do.
Yes,
But I don't have any books that I can recommend, I'm afraid. I'm sorry.
that's fine, inshallah. But I do have a 5-year-old, so inshallah that book might be useful for him.
Yes, I think you would. I think you probably would both enjoy it. But take a look at it online, see if it's something that you think is applicable. Because I don't really know, in terms of price and shipping, how it would be. So you might want to just look at it first, and there might be a few pages that you can check, online. Generally, places like Amazon tend to have a few pages that you can view of the book first to see. But I found it to be very practical and accessible, so you can just use things around the home to apply those skills.
And how would I get your contact details if I needed a bit of?
Um, should I just give an email? Would that be okay? Or what's
Yeah,
your,
it's perfect. It's perfectly up to you if you want to give it out. I'll leave that to your discretion, inshallah.
yeah, because what Dr. Miriam Montessori does at this age is it's moving into a lot of it's abstract math now. But if a child didn't have the foundational math where you're doing, when I say foundational math, I mean like the concrete. Because what happens is you start with concrete, and then there's a transition between concrete and into abstraction. Then you're just doing purely abstract work, i.e., paper and pencil, right? You're not seeing any materials, you're just doing it. And around 9, that's when that's happening. So because of that, it really depends on what it is specifically you're trying to teach them. Is it fractions? Is it understanding how decimals work? Is it, understanding shapes? So it really depends on what it is. But inshallah, I should be able to give you some pointers. And I know there are other resources out there, just off the top of my head, I can't really think of them right now.
Jazakallah khair, and that's been helpful anyway.
Alhamdulillah.
Also, so the Rakaya on this point, and inshallah, maybe we can wrap up after this, unless Sister Saima has another question. But I wanted to ask you, you kind of started talking about it, that if a child, because I don't, do you know, are you familiar with Miquan maths? Miquan?
No, I'm not.
Okay, so it's a kind of like very kind of, we use manipulative, I don't know what the
Yes.
blocks where they
Yes.
have the 1 unit and the 10 unit. So it's
Yes.
something similar, but like you said, the manipulatives can get very expensive very quickly. So that program is based on that. They start maths, they introduce all the symbol addition, subtraction, multiplication, division in one go. And it's all kind of like using manipulatives, very hands-on work. And then it kind of goes through, I would say it's very, even though it's an American program, it's very similar system to UK, where it's kind of introduces things and topics, and then the topics grow over time. I guess it's called spiral, the spiral education method. But my point, what I really want to ask you is that if a student didn't have like those kind of like Miquan or Montessori hands-on learning experiences to give them a foundation, how, and it might be out of the scope, you can tell me also because I know we're about to end, but how could you introduce these concepts to like a 10-year-old or an 11-year-old? Like, because I feel listening to your talk today that actually I've heard a lot of secondary school teachers, um, or that would be middle school in the US, um, say that it's difficult to catch students up with mathematics, and they try so many things, and I'm feeling like
So
maybe these kind of tools could help older children, um, go back and perhaps perform better and understand really what they're doing better at that point.
so my experience is that yes, and you can bring manipulatives in, and that's why it was hard to kind of answer Simon's question. Not really because it's a transition period. You have to really assess where that particular child is. But what one will do is, if they're struggling with place value, or if they don't seem to have some, and to be uncertain with it, is just do a quick lesson. I.e., you bring out those manipulatives, even if they're a bit older, and you just show to them, I want to show you exactly what this means. When you look at these numbers, this is what we're talking about. And you might spend a few lessons just doing it and having them do it. Okay, make this particular number. let's do this addition problem. It might be like a 4-digit problem, but they have all they're doing the materials. So they have like, you know, the sticks or whatever it is you're using. And I found sticks to not take up as much space as well. That's why like the idea of using the sticks, and they have it, and that way they can see, you know, when you're transferring a number from here to there, or you're doing the thing where people might cause carrying over and things like that. Okay, what does that really mean? And you're breaking the number down, and you're taking one over, or you're going to from one quantity to the other. Are you going from hundreds to tens? You're taking one of those tens out, you know, so that you can use it in the next column of numbers. But them actually seeing it makes more sense than just saying to them, okay, we're just going to take one from here or borrow from here or whatever. But they're actually seeing, okay, you're breaking this number up. Are you taking the rubber band out, taking some of the sticks out, you're transferring them over, and then they can then subtract, you know, from the number on top now, because they've got enough, because they've just done that carrying over, but they're actually physically seeing what does that look like. So I would say that you can do that with any child, you know, even children who are a little bit older. You don't have to spend a lot of time on it, because at this point they can just make the connection once they're seeing the material. And it might just take, you know, 2 or 3 times sometimes, you know, depends on the child. And don't feel like anything bad if you, okay, the child needs a bit more time. It's not even a problem, because the whole point of learning is that, okay, you've acquired the skill, you know what to do now. And as long as they've gotten the foundation, it doesn't really matter how long that takes. It might take a couple of lessons. It might take a week, you know. But then when they go to to doing things on paper, they remember, okay, this is what's going on. And they understand more, you know, what's happening, as opposed to the teacher just telling them, okay, this is the rule, this is what you do. So that can be applied to a child that's older, definitely. And that's something I did when I was in the classroom. I had some children who, you know, were doing intervention, and there was a particular year my school decided that they wanted the classroom teachers to teach the intervention classes, you know, as opposed to before you'd have like a specialist doing it. But they felt that the classroom teacher knows exactly what's going on because they're with them all the time. So they did that into the schedule, and I actually found that all of the children who were in my intervention came out, you know, which doesn't always happen, because usually it's kind of like they keep going each year, whereas I think it was just one semester, yeah, and they came out. And I think part of it is that I've been able to see exactly what the problem was. I already had materials because I've been collecting them over the years for the school. One day, inshallah. Anyway, so I had the materials. I would bring them into the classroom, and then they would be able to see, oh, when we're doing fractions, this is what's going on. When we're doing decimals, this is what's really happening, you know. It's really, I don't even know how to show you here, but there's a way of doing it. And that's why I'm thinking, if you email me like a specific area, I could give you an example of how that works. And I'm sure once you see how it works, you can then apply it, inshallah, to other areas. So that's why I was saying that to Saim, or even to you as well. I don't mind, you know, going through, like, giving us one specific example, and that way you can apply it to any other area, inshallah, that you want to work on.
Yeah, Jazakallah khair. That was really useful. And because I know that people listening have children of different ages. But yeah, Jazakallah khair for your talk. It was, mashallah. I love listening myself because I always learn and get pointers. And I also can get a sense of how to work with children in a really good way, beneficial way. So Jazakallah khair. And if that is all the questions, then inshallah, this wraps up our series with Ustadha Rakaya. And alhamdulillah, she's given her email for people who want to contact her further. If you would like your child to be able to work with her in a classroom setting, even though it's online, you can look at Stewards and see how that can be possible for our year 5-6 class, inshallah. And I think that's it. Jazakallah khair, Jazakumullah khairan to everyone who's come and who is also listening to the recording. Take care, inshallah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Thank you very much for inviting me to do this webinar. I appreciate it.